Although the origins of Strykar and his ascension onto the earldom of Mann are shrouded in mystery, the mad martial genius and his dynasty would forever change the known world. Scribes of the time exhibit confusion and uncertainty regarding the former Mormor Ck3's hasty abdication. All that is known is Strykar took full advantage of the ensuing chaos. The Mad Norseman quickly proclaimed the title as his own, with support from the minority Norse and Asatru populations, descendants remaining from the bygone era of Ragnar Lothbrok and his spawn. With no resistance from the populace, Strykar and his peasants became overlords overnight. Although some nobility, primarily his councillors, pushed back against Strykar's baseless claim to the throne, none were willing to challenge their new earl. Realizing there was little legitimacy to his title, the young earl swore fealty to the neighbouring kingdom of Scotland. Although reluctant, King Malcolm chose to recognise and legitimise the earl and his ill-begotten position in exchange for his loyalty. The earl was also quick to negotiate religious exemptions to ensure persecution wouldn't burden his people. With his position legitimised and the kingdom of Scotland behind him, Earl Strykar began his decades-long plunder of Irish land. Although his early raiding campaigns were met with bountiful success, the Earl's overzealous lust for gold and glory quickly put him in check, suffering an almost fatal wound in the Battle of Wigton. Some say the witchcraft of his position was the only reason he survived. While pillaging his Irish neighbours, the news a civil war would engulf the Scottish kingdom quickly reached the Earl. Aware of the current monarch's disdain towards his character and beliefs, the Earl eagerly joined the revolt. Needing more gold to fund the war effort, the Earl challenged the Jarl of Iceland, easily besting him, one of his first displays of not only his superior prowess, but tactical might. In what seemed like an act of lunacy, the young Earl completely disbanded all of his men-at-arms in the middle of the war, only to replace them with a much smaller force of Varangian veterans. The Earl proclaimed Odin had spoken to him, and told him for as long as he and his successors only ever had one unit of men, the favour of the gods would follow them. With majority of the Scottish king's army defeated by his allies, Earl Strykar was tasked with finishing off the remaining survivors. With their spirit broke and morale gone, what remained of the king's army was cornered in the hills of Tain and slaughtered. Reports suggest only the king and 3 of his men managed to escape the battle with their lives. With the kingdom's capital falling under siege, the Scottish king had no choice but to abdicate his throne and give in to his vassals' demand. Duncan II would take his father's throne at the mere age of 11. Although assisting in the deposition of their tyrant king, Earl Strykar knew his fellow vassals still viewed him with great disdain. By ransoming the prisoners of the Civil War, the Earl was able to further bolster his army. Emboldened by his elite troops, Earl Strykar wanted to show those around him that Odin was by his side. The Earl marched to Dublin and began raiding to draw out Earl Marchard's forces. Hearing of the raiding troops of Strykar, Earl Marchard exhausted all of his resources, raising an army 3 times greater than that of his opponents, marching in haste to try and catch the raiders off guard. Having learned Marchard's forces were approaching, Strykar readied his men. Although the difference in numbers were evident, the difference of skill was even more clear. Strykar decisively won the battle, suffering no more than 100 casualties while inflicting over 400 and forcing the enemy into a rout. Again, Strykar would face an army, outnumbering his men 3-1, and again, through his tactical genius, he would pull off another stunning victory. Delivering the final blow, Earl Murchad's army would be completely slaughtered after being lured into the hills. News of the genius tactician quickly spread through the Isles, as battle after battle, no matter how outnumbered, a young earl named Strykar would always be victorious. The Earl's tactical genius earned him an audience with the king, in which he was appointed the new marshal. Although his unorthodox tactics were proven time and time again on the battlefield, many could not distinguish his genius from his madness, soon branding him the Mad. Distracted with his merciless raids and development of his county, the Earl had failed to realize Scotland was engulfed in another civil war. Although no formal alliance existed between the king and the Earl, in gratitude for the pardoning of his crimes and his position as marshal, the Earl joined the war to defend the king and his throne. Although the Earl's forces were vastly outnumbered, their smaller size was also their advantage. Their superior maneuverability allowed themselves to weave around the enemy atop a hill, granting an invaluable terrain advantage. The battle was a stunning victory, and a much needed one at that. Not only did the battle inflict grave casualties, but the opponent's armies were forced to rout in differing directions. The tides of the war were changing. Capitalizing on their enemy's lack of cohesion, the king and the earl pincered the main enemy force. The slaughter that ensued marked the turning point in the war. With the bulk of the traitors' land under occupation and no more than a few hundred levies left in their arsenal, the war was finally won, and all those who contributed were imprisoned. Although the Earl's contributions to the war were invaluable in the king keeping his throne, the king refused to recognize this, even going as far as rescinding the Earl's position as his marshal. Furious, the Earl sent a message to the king. "I will watch your kingdom burn. Pray I am merely a spectator and not holding the torch." Realizing his time as a vassal of Scotland needed to come to an end, the Earl raided till his coffers were full and his men were hardened, in preparation of his fight for independence. Not long after, a war against the king's tyranny began. Realizing the value of Earl Strykar and his elite units, the king reluctantly offered to reinstate his position as marshal. So be it, he joined the war in defending the king's throne. However, the offer was refused. Although the hunchback king won a few of the initial skirmishes, it was clear his forces would not be able to repel the Duke for long. Once again, he pleaded with the Earl, offering the position of marshal yet again, but his words fell on deaf ears, as once again the Earl rejected his offer. Part 2 of the Strykar saga will continue.